This is a neat addition to the Holy Scripture for the use of schools. Now, wait a minute, I thought the Founding Fathers didn't want the Bible in schools. What do you do with this? This is where it gets a lot of fun, is you start looking at the documents that they did and what they said rather than what the narrative is about them today. What's the average length of the Constitution in the history of the world? Did the research, average length is 17 years. We're about to punch 250 on our constitutional republic. We're the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. The number one source was the Bible. 34 quotes of all of the quotes of Founding Fathers came out of the Bible. If you can name me 5 individuals who signed the Declaration, we'll give this gift card. Of the 56 guys who signed this Declaration, 29 had what we call seminary degrees. Graduated from schools that give seminary degrees. 29. We're a biblical nation. The United States and Congress assembled recommend this edition of the Bible to the inhabitants of the United States. Jefferson gets that letter. He uses that famous phrase, a wall of separation between church and state. Their concern is the government's going to come in and shut us down because we're Baptists up here in a congregational state. If all you know is the bad stuff, then you want to fundamentally reshape the nation.
Are all of the Founding Fathers, did they want to build a racist nation?
Well, first off,
all right, I'm here with David Barton. This is an incredible man of God, and he has a passion for rebuilding our country's history. And so we're going to take a look around at his incredible museum. This is I saw his first museum, and I was in awe. And he's like, you know what? Come check out my second museum. And we are here in this beautiful place that is filled with an unlimited amount of stories. And so we're going to have a conversation today on the podcast about our nation's history, how it was founded, some things that a lot of people do not know. And your mind will be blown, and you will hear things you've never heard before. So let's dive in. Where do you want to start?
Well, since we're coming up on the 250th anniversary, and that's a big deal, and it should be a big deal, when you look, all right, we're a constitutional republic. When you look over the history of the world, about 5,800 years recorded history, over that period of time, there's thousands of nations, 193 nations at the UN this year. So when you take and look at those nations, University of Chicago Law School and University of Illinois said, hey, what's the average length of the Constitution in the history of the world? And they went back and did the research. Average length is 17 years.
Wow.
We're about to punch 250 on our constitutional republic. We're the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. We're special. We had different ideas. We had different beliefs. We incorporated those, different philosophy. Ideas have consequences. Clearly, we came up with ideas that were not being used back then. So that's the starting place. Now, when you say what ideas made us special, University of Houston said, well, let's see what the founders read and used and what they quoted when they made this government. And so they took 15,000 writings out of the founding era, a bunch. That's a big sample. They went back, and it took them 10 years, but they went all the way through, and every time they found the Founding Fathers making a quote, they noted that. It took them 10 years. They found the source of every quote. So as it turns out, the number one most cited individual when the Founding Fathers built our government is a guy named James Montesquieu, or Charles Montesquieu. He's a French philosopher, 2-volume set that he did in 1750 on the spirit of the laws. Number one cited individual. Number 2 cited individual is William Blackstone. He's an attorney, English attorney, 4-volume law set. Americans love that. Thomas Jefferson said Americans read Blackstone's commentaries like Muslims read the Quran, so it's a big book for us. The third is John Locke, The True Treatise of Government. He did it in 1690. That was the book on which they built the Declaration. So that's your top 3 sources, top 3 individuals. The number one source was the Bible. 34 quotes of all of the quotes of Founding Fathers came out of the Bible. So we
are a Christian nation.
I would say not Christian, we're biblical.
Yep.
And there's a big difference because there's a lot of Christians that are not biblical.
No, that's good.
And so we're a biblical nation. And we got things wrong, but we got out of it faster than any other nation. People like to point to slavery. And we had slavery, but show me any nation in the world in that era that did not have slavery.
And do you have some of the some original founding documents here?
Well, let me just point to this. Okay. You're in a place now where that when you see this wall over here, this is the only place in America that we know of right now where you can go and see a document from every single signer of the Declaration and every single signer of the Constitution.
Wow.
So National Archives has all these guys, they don't display them. So the Library of Congress, all these guys, this is the only place displayed where you can see all of the 56 signers of the Declaration, all the 39 signers of the Constitution. That's the reason 250 years. So that's when we celebrate 250. Now, the trick is, who are those guys? And this is where it gets really interesting. We do a lot of universities, and Tim, my son, he speaks all over universities. And he's got this gift card he's had. And he says, all right, if you can name me 5 individuals who signed the Declaration. Here's a picture of them, show a big slide, name 5. If you name 5, we'll give this gift card, $20 gift card. He's had it 9 years. Nobody can, so everybody knows 1 or 2 or 3. We don't know these guys. And they all have stories. They all made remarkable contributions. 7 of these guys never lived to see the freedom they signed for. So there's a lot of sacrifices there. But there's a lot of ministers there too, which is interesting. Of the 56 guys who signed this Declaration, 29 had what we call seminary degrees. Graduated from schools that give seminary degrees. 29. Wow. So this nonsense about, oh, they're a bunch of atheists, agnostics, deists. Well, you only know 1 or 2, and you probably know the 2 that are the least religious. How about the rest of them? How about Benjamin Rush, and how about John Witherspoon, all these other guys? So this is where America gets fun. When you start seeing American history, is you get the biographies of these guys and what they went through and what they did. It's really remarkable. So that's a good starting place, is the 250.
What document would you say is most interesting? Or maybe where do people get our, do they get our foundation wrong? Like our founding fathers are right here, and so what are some interesting stories that are maybe counter to what people have originally heard?
Let me take you to a document. Now there's some fun stories too, but I'm going to take you to a document in the sense that, okay, these are our founding fathers, and I mentioned that people think that basically they're secular, they're not religious, etc. So one of the fun documents that I'll take you to over here is this document right here. Now, this happens to be one of the rarest books in the world. Originally, when this was printed in 1782, they printed 10,000. And there's only 32 or 33 left, and most of them are in the hands of Smithsonian and Library of Congress. There's only like 7 or 8 in private hands, and here's 2 of them right there. Wow. So this is a Bible that was done, and on the inside of this Bible, interestingly enough, it has an endorsement by Congress in the front of this. And there it is. The United States and Congress assembled recommend this edition of the Bible to the inhabitants of the United States. So our founding fathers and Congress printed it. Now, why would they do that? Well, when you go to the records of Congress, it says that this is a neat addition to the Holy Scripture for the use of schools. Now, wait a minute. I thought the founding fathers didn't want the Bible in schools. What do you do with this? See, this is where it gets a lot of fun, is you start looking at the documents that they did and what they said rather than what the narrative is about them today. And so many, many things. So this is a fun piece, because it right up front establishes they thought the Bible was really important. This is what this is the first Bible printed in America, because in 1781 we're still fighting the British. And there was a British law that made it illegal to print any Bible in English in America, because the king tells you what it's got to be. I mean, we've got a state religion. The king says we're all Anglicans or whatever. If you're in France or Spain, you're going to be Catholic. If you're in England, you're going to be Anglican. If you're in Germany, you're going to be Lutheran. State tells you. Not in America. So we say everybody needs to know the Bible. So
what do you do with the separation of church and state then?
I love the separation of church and state to
Let's
talk
about it.
Because it goes back to a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote when he was president of the United States. So let's go back a little further. When George Washington becomes president, there are no political parties. And in his administration, you start having a difference of philosophy. You have John Adams, who thinks maybe the government should do more. And you have Thomas Jefferson, who thinks it ought to do less. And so Jefferson's your Secretary of State and John Adams your Vice President. And people kind of gravitate to both of those views. Government needs to do less, government needs to do more. And so the government needs to do more kind of guys, that became the Federalist Party. They're pro-federal. They think central government's a good deal. The Thomas Jefferson guys are called the anti-federalists. We want less government. Let the states do it. Let the local communities do it. So that starts 2 political parties. Now,
when was that?
That starts about 1792.
Okay, so just, I mean, very, wow.
3 years in. Oh, wow. Look, we tend to coalesce into groups. That's why there's so many denominations in America. We tend to make groups. And so Washington is just about to start his second term. Now you got 2 kind of internal groups fighting. And so when George Washington retires after 2 terms, Adams and Jefferson run. And now you've got 2 political parties fighting each other, the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. And as goes with campaigns, the Anti-Federalists talk about the Federalists, they're big government guys, and that's John Adams. And the John Adams guys talk about Jefferson, they don't like the federal government doing stuff, and they're not even very religious. So what happens is the denominations split. And what happens is the Baptists and a lot of those denominations get behind Thomas Jefferson, and the Congregationalists and a lot of the what you would call more northeastern denominations get behind John Adams. And so you've got ministers supporting both guys and ministers attacking the other ministers on the other side. And so what happens is, in the case of the Baptists, they love Jefferson because Jefferson is an Anglican guy, but he's in Virginia. And Virginia is one of the 13 colonies that still has a state-established church. In Virginia, the Anglican church is a state church. And so in Virginia, the Anglicans mistreat the Baptists, they mistreat the Quakers, they mistreat all sorts of folks who are not their denomination.
Okay.
And Jefferson went to bat for all those other groups. As an Anglican guy, he went to bat for the Baptists, he went to bat for the Presbyterians, for the Quakers, for Jews. And so what happens is now up in New England, you got a bunch of Baptists in a congregational area where John Adams is, and these Baptists say, hey, if John Adams gets his way, he's going to shut our churches down. We love Jefferson. Yeah. And so when Jefferson gets elected, these Baptists in Connecticut write him a letter and said, we are so glad you won the election. God raised you up for this. What a great thing. And they said, but we're really concerned that the government might try to come in and shut us down. And so Jefferson gets that letter. It's written to him in October, November 1801. He responds back January the 1st, 1802. And this is where he uses that famous phrase, a wall of separation between church and state. Now remember, their concern is the government's going to come in and shut us down because we're Baptists up here in a congregational state. Yeah. And Jefferson says, you don't have to worry about that. There's a wall of separation between church and state, and he goes on to explain it. So the wall of separation is what keeps the government from shutting down religious activities. His letter is 233 words long. It's 3 paragraphs, really clear. Since 1947, actually 47, 48, 2 court decisions, the courts have not quoted more than 8 words out of that 233 word letter. It's easy to quote the whole letter. But everybody hears separation church and state, and they say, oh, you can't have Bible in schools, and you can't have a nativity scene up, and you can't pray in public. Separation church and state means the government won't stop your religious activity. And so it's exactly, and a great example of that is if you take...
So that's accurate? That's interesting.
Oh yeah, that's accurate. Okay. Because take Jefferson, for example. He's now President of the United States. So as President of the United States, he actually uses federal funds to pay for the Kaskaskia Indians to have a missionary come teach them the gospel. And Jefferson funds it. I've got the treaty. We got the treaty from 1803. Jefferson funds Christian missionaries to go with the Kaskaskia Indians because they want someone to teach them the gospel. You've also got Thomas Jefferson, that back when Jefferson is in charge of the layout of Washington, D.C., because when Washington is president, we're in New York City as our first capital. Next 10 years is Philadelphia. And we're building Washington, D.C. in that period of time, and Jefferson was the Secretary of State under Washington, building Washington, D.C. So when we move into Washington, D.C., Jefferson's the first president to have a full term in Washington, D.C. Interesting, you'll find that in the records of Congress, December the 4th, 1800, they have now moved into the brand new building. And so Thomas Jefferson is vice president at that point, and they decide that on every Sunday, we're going to take the biggest room we have in the Capitol, which is the Hall of the House of Representatives, and we're going to turn it into a church every Sunday. We're going to have church in the Capitol every Jefferson endorsing that, and then Jefferson started going to church in the Capitol every Sunday. So Jefferson becomes a big proponent of the church of the Capitol. He's there when the first woman preaches in the Capitol, Dorothy Ripley, just all sorts of firsts. But with Jefferson going to that church at the Capitol, so he writes this letter to the Danbury Baptist on Friday. On Sunday, he's at church in the Capitol. If he's talking about separation of church and state, what's he doing with church at the federal Capitol? What is going on with that? And then, just like what's happening now in Washington, D.C., the president is head of Washington, D.C. under the Constitution. Now, in the 1960s, they passed laws, said local government, so now you have a mayor in D.C., but it used to be the president was the head of D.C. as well as the head of the United States. So back in that day, by the way, we've seen that even as President Trump has gone in and said, hey, if I need to become mayor, I'm going to become mayor. We're going to get crime stopped.
Yeah.
So he's taken over the
doing
city.
a lot of work right now.
He is,
in DC.
because the Constitution allows him to do that. Under the Constitution, he's in charge of D.C.
Yeah.
So Jefferson's in charge of D.C. as well. And to see the things that happen, for example, he's in charge of the school board of Washington, D.C. He's actually made the president of the school board in Washington, D.C. while he's president of the United States. Well, this is a brand new city, brand new schools. Jefferson authors their plan of education. In that plan of education, Thomas Jefferson put the Bible in as the primary reading textbook in public schools in Washington, D.C.
Beautiful.
Where's the separation?
Got it.
Separation means the government can't stop it. It doesn't.
Separation means the government cannot stop.
There's a separation, church and state, because that's what it was in Europe. The government came in and told you what the faith's going to be, how you practice it, what you do. Government can't tell us what to do with our faith. We can practice it. We can show it everywhere.
So it's
the
not
government's
a forced
not secular.
faith,
It's not
right?
a forced.
Exactly.
It's not a state-established religion.
Yep, exactly. Okay. What any documents? So we had a conversation the last time I was at your other museum around our country is our country an inherently racist country? Meaning, are all of the founding fathers did they drive and want to build a racist nation?
Well, when you go to the 1619 project that came out 1619 on the 400th anniversary of Jamestown, their deal was America's been racist from the beginning. Look at this, 1619, slavery comes to Jamestown. That's what's defined us all the way through.
Yeah.
Well, first off, slavery didn't come to Jamestown in 1619. Matter of fact, there was a kind of what we would call a privateer, which is kind of a private pirate, and they were able to take and capture a ship that was a slave ship going down to the Caribbean or Cuba. Don't know which one, but it was headed that direction.
And by the way, while we're having this conversation, are there any documents tied into some?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there are. We'll go look at
great.
We'll go look at some of those documents as well. And so what happens? These privateers, they capture this slave ship, and then they've got all this booty that they now have won, including a bunch of slaves, and they don't want slaves because they're out robbing ships. So they go to the nearest town they can find, and that's Jamestown. And they said, we've got 19 slaves here. We want to sell those slaves. And Jamestown says, slavery is illegal in Jamestown. You can't sell us those slaves. Well, what do you do? Well, we have indentured servants here, which is all over. That's just a form of making a contract that I'll work for you 7 years if you'll pay my way or whatever. So they get to Jamestown, they become indentured servants. Every single one of those 19 slaves ends up being a free landowner in Virginia, because after you serve your indenture, you become a free landowner. The first time you see slavery in Virginia is 1653. When one of those blacks who had become a slave owner, he actually, what happens is he indentures other people. And one of the people he indentured was another black man named John Kaser. And so in 1653, he said, look, I've had this guy indentured and he's not working very hard for me. He needs to work for me the rest of his life if I'm going to get my money back from this guy. And he asked the court, can I own this guy for the rest of his life? And the court said yes. And so the first occasion of slavery in America in Jamestown is 1653, when a black man sued to own another black man, and the court said, yes, you can do that.
There's documentation around that?
Oh yeah, there's lots of legal documentation.
Interesting. Okay.
So the 1619 project, all wrong. And the other part that they didn't do is they pointed everything at Jamestown. So I'm pointing everything at Jamestown. How about the other colony up there, the Plymouth colony, where the Pilgrims landed? 1641, they made slavery illegal. They made it they quoted the Bible to make owning a slave and what they called man stealing. If you go steal someone and bring them here as a slave, that's a capital offense. And so when a slave ship arrived there, they sentenced the people to death. And the people said, wait a minute, everybody else has slavery, we didn't know. And they said, okay, we'll let you go, but don't ever bring slaves back here, because now you know. So you have the Pilgrims who were anti-slavery from the very beginning, and you're saying, wait a minute, that's not the part of the story we hear anymore. What happens is that New England area all becomes anti-slavery.
Yeah, what's interesting is the history books right at our schools teach something different.
They do.
Right?
They do. And so that's where you go back to these founding fathers.
Yeah.
What you'll find is that all of the northern colonies abolished slavery by 1804. That counts New Jersey, which is kind of a middle colony.
Okay.
So all the northern colonies abolished slavery by 1804. Now, it took the southern states till 1865 to do that, and it's a constitutional amendment, the 13th Amendment. But there is no region of the world that abolished slavery before the New England area did. They're the first in the world to do it. When America abolished slavery in 1865, we were the 4th nation in the world out of 128 nations. So we're still in the elite category. So those who say, oh, America's so terrible, no, we were way ahead. And by the way, 193 nations we have today, 94 still have not abolished slavery. It's still not a crime in 94 nations. There are 40 million active slaves in the world today. That's more than all the slave trade for 400 years combined. So we got more slaves today. Nobody's talking about that. So when you look at founding fathers, those guys from New England, oh yeah, some of them owned slaves, but overwhelmingly they were anti-slavery. When you look at many of the founders in the South, tend to be pro-slavery, but that's where the least population is. There weren't many founders from there. And then you look at the middle ones like Virginia, you got George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. They owned slaves, yeah they did, and they didn't want to. By state law, it's illegal to free their own slaves. So they passed federal laws to help end slavery, anti-slavery laws. They couldn't do it in their own state. That's why Washington freed his slaves on his death, because in 1782, Virginia for the first time said, okay, we'll let you free your slaves on your death. So Washington in 1799, and then they said, what are we thinking? And they repealed that law, so Jefferson couldn't free his slaves on his death. So there's a lot of complications to the law that people don't know and don't study, but it's documented.
What would you say?
Let's look at some Black history stuff.
Okay, let's do it.
So,
and I'd love to see what it was, some of the most incredible artifacts that you have here and pieces. I would love to hear some stories.
There's a lot of fun stuff. Let's go back. So talking about the Pilgrims and the Jamestown colony, this is an 1888 kind of a school map. It'd be a wall board that you'd have in a classroom. And if you look at it, you see the two different colonies over here. There's Jamestown there, and there is Plymouth up there. And down here, it has a circle. It says $1 and it says mammon, which is money. So this is a money colony. Up here, it says Bible. And they both had an influence on America, and you see God's curse of slavery coming out here, and they have all these negative things, avarice and lust and ignorance and superstition and secession and rebellion and the Dred Scott decision, Kansas-Nebraska Act, fugitive slave law. All these bad things came out of that Jamestown area. But look at all the good stuff that came out from the Bible area. And we never talk about that. We want to make 1619 the story. That's part of the story. But the real story is this up here and all the good things that came out of there. And so that's the other part. Now, when you look at the difference between here and there and the way they handle things, a good example are these documents right here. Now, these documents right down here are signed at the bottom, and they say Wentworth Cheswell. Well, so what? Who is he? Well, he's a black man elected to office in 1768 in New Hampshire, one of the founding fathers of New Hampshire. He's credited with starting their school system as well as their library system up there. He made a Paul Revere kind of a ride. He was a patriot in the Revolution, and he was in a white community. So a black guy elected in a white community. He was reelected for 49 years. He held 9 different political positions. Somebody ought to be talking about that in history somewhere. But we don't get any of that at all. Now, he's not the first black man elected in America. You got to back up to 1641. Matthias de Souza is elected in Maryland. Black man elected in a white community in Maryland back in 1641. Well then, if you'll take these guys on that back there, there's the first 7 elected to the federal Congress. On the left is Hiram Rhodes Revels, first black U.S. Senator, then Benjamin Turner and Ona Cross. And so by the time you get to 1876, we've had more than 1,000 black elected officials in America. Now, just to put that in perspective, when's the first time that Great Britain elected a black to office? It's 1987. When's the first time Russia elected a black to office? 2010. When's the first time Italy elected a black to office? 2013. Wait a minute, we got 1,000 by 1876 and somehow we're the racist nation in the world? So we have so much history that people just don't even know about. And so when you know who these black folks are and what they've done, just the remarkable things that, and even the civil rights records, these are some of the original civil rights laws passed by Congress. But between 1861 and 1876, you had 23 civil rights laws passed. This one, let's see, this is establishing the Freedmen's Bureau. This is to equalize the pay of white and black soldiers. This one is everybody gets treated the same in the courts. These are all civil rights laws that came in the Civil War time, and nobody even talks about that aspect of it. It's all about slavery. No. there was an area of the country that was pro-slavery, and there's a whole big area of the country that wasn't. And so as a result, we tend to know the bad and the ugly. We know very little about the good. And so even the fact that, again, 1,000 black elected officials by 1876, who in America knows that? Going back to 1641 even. Let's
take a look at this. So you have some original, there were some documents in here? Or?
Right here.
Oh, right there. Okay.
This is the first draft. This is the first printing of Jefferson's original draft of the Declaration of Independence.
Wow.
So when the Declaration of Independence is done, what happened in Congress was on the 7th of June, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia made a motion and said, let's separate from Great Britain. And Congress said, let's table that motion, because they didn't have a document ready to say why they were going to separate. So they tabled that motion, then they appointed 5 people to write the Declaration of Independence. And so this is the draft out of that committee of 5. Wow. This is all in Jefferson's hand. Jefferson was the key guy. Out of the 5 committee members, Adams said, Tom, you're the guy to do this. And so Jefferson wrote it. Then he passed it to the other guys for their edits. And so it's kind of cool over here. You'll see, if you can see right there, it says Dr. Franklin
yep.
and Mr. Adams. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a Google Doc. This is where Franklin scratched that out and put his words up there. And this is where Adams scratched it out and said, why don't you say this? So this is the Committee of 5 editing the Declaration of Independence.
Wow.
So this is the rough draft of it. Now, what happens here is there's 24 grievances. And there's 27 grievances in the final declaration, but there's 24 here. And the largest grievance is right here. That you see over here, there's 2 lines here, there's 4 lines here, there's 4 lines here, 2 lines here. This grievance right here is Thomas Jefferson. He says, we've been trying to end the slave trade, and King George III keeps striking down every anti-slavery law we do. If we're going to end the slave trade, we're going to have to get free from Great Britain. So the longest grievance in the Declaration is an anti-slavery clause written by Thomas Jefferson explaining why we got to separate from Great Britain so we can end slavery.
Wow.
And that's the original draft.
Beautiful.
And you see here, men, people say, well, he didn't think blacks were men. He capitalized it right there to make sure they knew men should be free, regardless of color. So that's the original draft of the Declaration.
Wow.
So this book right here is signed by Lemuel Haynes. Lemuel Haynes is a black pastor with a white congregation in New England. He's part of the American War for Independence. This is one of his sermons that he preached in a church there, and this is his Bible and book. But again, the black and white community thing in New England, just common. Black pastor, it wasn't unusual. I can't say it's common because there weren't high population blacks there, but the blacks that were there, it was not the same thing you see in the South. So the population was not large, but there was a lot of equality. Over here, a lot of World War II stuff.
Okay.
World War II stuff, kind of fun stuff. So when Japanese hit Pearl Harbor, we're at war, now we got to have soldiers. So we start recruiting soldiers, and when you get recruited, you get a Bible. This is given to you as part of your recruitment package.
Great.
Now, brown is for Army and blue is for Navy. So you join the Army here, and on the inside, when you open this up, it has here a message from Franklin Roosevelt about how you really need to read the Bible, guys. This is really important stuff. And so that's the message from Franklin Roosevelt. But when you look at the Navy Bible, and you see the American flag here, and by the way, you see a big flag back there, so that's a battleship flag from back World War II days, all the way through Korea War. But when you open up over here, you still get the same thing with Franklin Roosevelt, but notice the Christian flag is flying higher. Now that's like, hey, you can't do that. Nothing flies higher than the American flag. To this day, in the flag code, the only flag that can't fly higher than the American flag is the call to divine service. And so that's what you see on that pennant right there. That pennant on the wall is what they would fly on the ships, calling you to divine service twice a day.
So
let's get together and pray. So military-wise, and by the way, that flag back there is a flag from D-Day. That landed on D-Day. That's a D-Day flag. That was the 3rd ship in on D-Day.
I love it. You got to see the, I have a flag just like that.
Yeah, and it's got shrapnel all over it. They talked about how they were just getting pounded by the German stuff coming in. And this, when we did D-Day, the way that President Roosevelt announced D-Day, big operation, 7,000 ships, 160,000 troops. He announced that by saying, guys, they're landing right now, let's pray. So he led the nation in a 6-minute prayer. This is his prayer that he did. This is 1944. This is the prayer he did. It became the Christmas card for the White House. That is the White House Christmas card in 1944 was his D-Day prayer. So that's what you find on that D-Day prayer. Then when we ended the war, here's the call for a day of prayer signed by Harry Truman to end the war.
The integration of faith was
all the way
so
through,
significant
top to
all the
bottom,
way
all the
through
way.
our history. And it's incredible the amount of work that's being done to remove it. And we're seeing a resurgence right now, which is quite beautiful.
And by the way, I mentioned a couple of things earlier. So these are pretty amazing. This, if you open this out, this is a map. This happens to be of an Asian area. There's different maps of different areas. These are all silk maps. And what happened with these silk maps is wherever we sent a warrior into action, we sent a map with them. And so on D-Day, when you had the 21,000 paratroopers landing on D-Day, they all, and 160,000 troops, they all had a map of Germany and of France and that whole region, and they rolled it up and put it under their collars. And so this was rolled up and put it under their collars. And the reason was that if they captured you, Germans captured you, they're going to frisk you and take your gun and everything, but they won't check your collar. And it was an escape map. This shows you where everything is and how to get away. 16,000 Allied troops used these maps to escape after D-Day, after they were captured.
Wow.
So these are pretty fun as well. And then over here, when they went in on D-Day, the 21,000 paratroopers landed behind German lines. They were behind the German lines to keep the Germans from rushing to the beach because we surprised them. They didn't think that was the beach. They thought we were going to land at Dover. We landed a couple hundred miles away at Normandy. So the Germans were going to come rushing. So the paratroopers were there to keep the Germans back. Well, they're behind German lines, and they don't speak German. Our guys don't, very few speak German. So you don't yell out, hey, where are you guys? What they would do, the 101st Airborne would use these. And you would, and if you heard that, and there's an American around, you would answer, and so you don't have any words going back and forth. Well, the 82nd Airborne also parachuted in on that day, and they said, we want those. And the commander of 82nd Airborne said, no. If you've got room for that, you got room for 2 extra bullets in your pocket. You're not taking this. And so what happened was they went to the toy shops and got this. You see on there it says Pinocchio.
Yeah.
The movie had just come out, Disney movie.
Okay.
And so that was a little kid's
They were
toy.
using that.
And so the 82nd Airborne used this, and that's what they used when they hit. So again, that click, you listen to that if you hear that, because those guys, they didn't have the weather prediction we do now, and they didn't have the chutes that were real controllable. And a lot of those guys blew miles away from where they were dropped. And so that's why those became real important, was gathering together afterwards. So some World War II stuff is a lot of fun. This is a cool story. This is the first real offensive mission we did in World War II. The Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and that's a B-25 Mitchell. And we launched 16 of those off an aircraft carrier. Now what makes it interesting is those planes, it takes them 1,300 feet of runway to take off. Aircraft carrier has 450 feet. So how do you get that off an aircraft carrier? And how do you get it on an aircraft carrier, for that matter? And so the mission was, if we can have long-range bombers, we can reach out and touch Japan from a long way away. We want to let Japan know that we're awake, you've wakened us up now, and we're coming after you later. And so at this point, we can't get an aircraft carrier close enough to get a plane there off a carrier, because they'll just destroy the rest of our carriers like they did at Pearl Harbor, without carriers, but the rest of the ships. And so they figured, well, if we can get a long-range ship, we can get within reach of Japan, send these long-range ships in, they can bomb Japan. So what happened, 16 of these, there's 5 men on each crew, so 80 guys, 16 of these planes, they modified them to take off an aircraft carrier with only 450 feet. So they took nearly all the bombs out of them. They each only had 4 bombs rather than the big bomb load they had. They took the ammo, the machine guns, there's a machine gun in the tail back there, they took it and all the ammo out. And they put extra fuel tanks in, and they made it light enough they could get off the aircraft carrier. So they fly to Japan, they bomb Japan, and then they fly to China, which is an ally back then, and they land in China, and then they work their way back. So as they land, none of them had enough gas to make it. They all crashed before China. They had to find their way in. The Japanese were in China in many places, and so 3 of the crews were were captured or taken, and if eventually most of them worked their way back. But there were 2 crews that bailed out, and the Japanese got them. And 2 of the guys died on the bailout, and the other are prisoners. And then they executed some of those guys, and they held the others and tortured them throughout the war. And one of those guys, there was a Jake DeShazer and Bob Hite. Both of them were Doolittle Raiders, and they came out with such bitterness. The Japanese had so abused them and so tortured them. And as it turns out, the guy who led the attack on Pearl Harbor is this man here. This guy here is Mitsuo Fuchida. He led the attack. He's their best naval aviator, and he ends up becoming a Christian after the war. He bumps into these 2 guys that had been in prison there, and both of them eventually become Christians, very evangelical Christians, and so they get together after the war and hold crusades together, Japanese and American crusades after the war.
Beautiful.
And so all over Japan, as MacArthur is doing reconstruction, he's trying to get the Bible back in, and so that's a fun one. It says, I bombed Pearl Harbor. That's exactly it. And so I was a prisoner of Japan. You see these guys, this is some of that reconciliation after the war.
What's over here? The Hitler nomination.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, this is a ballot back here. It's a German election ballot. Hitler came to power in 1933. And you see the ballot back there, it's a vote for Hitler. And by the way, all the other names below Adolf Hitler, that's kind of like his team. It's like voting for president, vice president, secretary of state. It's all his cabinet guys. But you only have one choice, and that's Hitler. And so it's, why have a ballot? No, because they have free and fair elections. It's only one candidate, that's all you're allowed. So this is World War II stuff. This is a lot of the Holocaust type stuff. We have so much from the Holocaust, what they went through. We have letters, this letter right here describing some of the barbarities they found in the camps. We knew stuff was going on, but we just didn't know the depth of depravity until we were able to go in and see it and free a lot of the prisoners. There was one camp where 28,000 died after we freed them. They were in such bad shape they were not able to recover, and they were just so emaciated and so starved that even after we freed them, 28,000 more died in that camp. So it was pretty rough and unbelievable, and people who don't think it was that bad, they need to see the description, see what's there.
Yeah, I'd love to see. So you have some Bibles from some of the.
Yeah, there's some cool Bibles.
Yeah.
Again, going back to the notion the Founding Fathers weren't very religious, you go, well, that's kind of interesting, because if you take John Witherspoon, who's a signer of the Declaration, this guy right here, this Bible right here, he did in 1791. This is called America's First Family Bible, signer of the Declaration. He was also the president of Princeton University. And by the way, this is one of the many sermons he preached. This is a sermon by John Witherspoon right there. So here's a founding father that is a pastor, preacher, came out with America's very first family Bible. This man over here, this is another signer of the Declaration. This is Charles Carroll of Carrollton. He's the final surviving signer of the Declaration of all 56. He's the last one to die. And in here, he talks about, on the mercy of my Redeemer, I rely for salvation, and on his merits, not on the works I've done in obedience to his precepts. Very evangelical sounding founding father.
Yep.
You take over here, this is a founding father, Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush actually started the first Bible Society in America. He started the Sunday School movement in America, signer of the Declaration. This is the Bible that he did. This is the first mass-produced Bible done in America. This is the Constitution for the very first Bible Society in America from Benjamin Rush. This Bible down here is called a hot press Bible. It came out in 1808. It's called the John Thompson Bible. And this particular Bible, there were about roughly, I think it was about 21 founding fathers who helped fund the production of this Bible. Considered the largest Bible in America done to that point. They used high technology, which was called hot press technology. They actually heated the ink. But 21 founding fathers helped do that. You have Bibles over here that also were part of the founding fathers. We have Bible from Francis Hopkinson, signer of the Declaration, John Dickinson, another signer of our documents. So really fun stuff. And this is called Watts Hymnal. Now this is kind of fun, because Watts Hymnal, this hymn book right here, this is Isaac Watts, who put the 150 Psalms to music. But the way you did music back then, there's no musical notation. So you had a cantor who would sing the melody. You would have the words, they would sing the melody, then you'd repeat the melody.
Like beatboxing.
There you go. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So this is the way it had been, but that changed with a signer of the Declaration right here. This signer of the Declaration right here is Francis Hopkinson. This is the first purely American hymn book. He's the first guy to sit the entire book of Psalms to music in America. So, and this is the first time we have musical notation. It doesn't have the staff like we have it today. Every note is the same value, but at least you can see what the music's doing. But what's fun here, he set that, and he was the music director of his church in Philadelphia, Christ Church, Philadelphia, signer of the Declaration. He did Psalms 119. That's 40 pages in this hymn book. You imagine going to church and singing a 40-page hymn? You know, and that's what he did. So so many founding fathers here. That's the first president of Congress who's the president of the American Bible Society. This is a book that he did attacking Thomas Paine when Thomas Paine said God has no place. So these are just all founding fathers and so much of what they do.
So I have so after how many years have you been collecting?
Man, probably 35 maybe.
35 years. And what was the reason you decided to get in?
Because I hated history. I stayed out of history.
Tell me more.
I was a school principal. I taught math and science, coached basketball. And in school, when I was going through school, I was taught history, and I didn't like it. I had a sixth grade, look, I got white hair. This goes back a long time. I had a sixth grade history teacher who told me that George Washington had 26 illegitimate children, giving new meaning to the phrase, Washington slept here. And I'm going, oh, that's the American founding. Not interested. And so I just turned it off. And I went through learning how bad the founders were, atheists, agnostics, deists. I'm a guy of faith. I didn't like. And so that's what I had learned. And then I came across two really old documents. And they were history documents. And I read them. And they dealt with parts of history I'd been taught, except these were originals. And they were opposite to everything I'd been taught in school. One of them was a Supreme Court case from 1844. Daniel Webster was arguing the case at the court, and it was whether we should have Bible in schools. And in an 8-0 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court said, of course we're going to have Bible. We would not take the Bible out. How crazy is that? And I'm going, whoa, 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 whoa. I was told these guys, atheists, agnostics, deists. Now we got a unanimous Supreme Court decision saying if you're going to be a government-funded school, you will teach the Bible. That's not what I was taught. And then I found George Washington's farewell address, 1796. I read it. It used to be required reading in every class. We have records that there were states that would require every year for the first 8 years of school, you took a test on 4 documents. And it was the U.S. Constitution, Declaration of Independence, the state constitution, and Washington's farewell address. So everybody had to know that. And you go through and man, it's got about 13 areas of really powerful recommendations to keep the country on track. And one of them is don't ever let the country become secular. He said religion and morality, the only supports of government. And he said don't let someone call themselves a patriot if they try to take religion and morality out. Whoa, 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 whoa. You're the guy that wasn't moral. You're the guy that had 26 illegitimate kids, and now you're telling us to be moral? And then I look, he didn't have any illegitimate children, but I was taught that he did. And so the more I got into the old stuff, the more interesting it got because the more counter-narrative it was to everything I was taught. And so we started looking for more and finding more, and it was out there floating around and easy to get. And so now we've got about 160,000 items from about any aspect of history you want. And look, America's made of the good, the bad, the ugly. There's plenty of bad, plenty of ugly. I can probably point out more than the critics can on the left side. But what I can also do is point out the good. And there's more good in America than there is bad and ugly. And that's what people don't know it today, is the good part of it, the wholesome part of it, the civil rights part of it that's not there. How many blacks held office and the great relationship that exists between most blacks and whites, and really how the racial relations got tense over politics, not over race so much as over politics. There's just so many stories that are unfinished that people don't know about, and that's what got me going on it. So now I love history.
And so why lie about American history? Why do people lie about that? Or what would be their intention in that? And I know the answer, but I would love to hear from your perspective.
It's easier to change something you think is flawed, inherently flawed. And so if you can make America inherently flawed, you can say, hey, we've got to fix this. Now, if you back off, like we talked at the beginning, if you point out that this is the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world, If you like stability, this is a good deal. Where did it come from? By the way, we're the most prosperous nation in any modern nation. If you like that, where did it come from? By the way, there's more creativity. We have more copyrights, patent protection, more stuff created in America each year than the rest of the world combined. Where'd that come from? So what happens is if you know the good stuff, you wonder where it came from, what I can do to preserve it. If all you know is the bad stuff, then you want to fundamentally change that. You want to get rid of that, and you want something different that'll work different. And if you go through school and if all you've been taught is the bad and the negative and how unjust and how, then you're open for substantive change to fundamentally reshape the nation.
We have a generation that really at a core level wants to change everything about our country.
Yeah.
How do you fix that?
You fix that, I think, by storytelling.
Okay.
If I can reintroduce you to people across history, if I can tell you the story of Annie Oakley, if I can tell you the story of Jedediah Smith, if I can tell you the story of people you've never heard and how great they were and actually how much impact they had on the nation, you go, man, I've never heard that before. And it's interesting to me, historically, speaking as a historian, look at the Bible. What year did David kill Goliath? Don't have a clue. Why? Because it's not in the Bible. Why? Because God didn't think it's important enough to put there. Why? Because that's not what matters. See, what happens today with American history, we do dates, names, and places. We don't do stories anymore. The Bible is full of stories, and we can connect to stories. I don't care what generation it is. I can find courage in some generation, model myself after that. I can find leadership, integrity, whatever. And so the Bible is full of stories and not what we do in America, the trivial stuff that doesn't matter. And so through storytelling, I think I can pretty much reconnect anybody, whatever their interest is, whatever their race is, whatever their perspective is. I can find a story that will draw you into how remarkable this nation is and how blessed by God it's been. And I say that because it's been a very God-blessed nation. It hasn't been a secular nation as we've been taught. And quite literally, this is a problem we face even right now. There's 22 states that have introduced a bill to put the Ten Commandments back up in classrooms.
Is it 22?
22.
Wow.
Now, it hadn't passed, but it's introduced.
Okay.
It's passed now, I think, in 4 states.
Okay.
So 4 states.
Was Texas the first?
No. First was Louisiana.
Okay.
Then it came Arkansas, then Texas, and Kentucky has just decided to put theirs back up, not by law, because they had it up in 1980 as the Supreme Court decision took it down, and the court I guess it's now 3 years ago, the Supreme Court said, you know, we got it all wrong back then, and Kentucky says, fine with us, we're putting it back up. So with them, they didn't have to pass the law, they already had one passed from back in 80. So that stuff is going back up, but the narrative right now is, no, it's unconstitutional, separation of church and state. Well, that only works because you redefine separation as something it never was. The Founding Fathers said separation is what keeps it from becoming secular. Now you've used it to force secular. And so this is where history becomes a lot of fun, because when you pull it back into policy, in 2022, the Supreme Court came out with a decision that said what we call the Lemon test is now vacated. They said the new test is, if it's historical and traditional, we're going to assume that it's constitutional. Now that's the way it had been until the activism of the 1960s and 70s, 2 court decisions there. The court said, you know, we have no precedent, but we're going to take prayer and Bible out of schools because we just think it's time to do something different. I mean, literally, they said no precedent. Well, now everybody thinks prayer and Bible out of schools is constitutionally mandated.
Even Christians.
Even
There's
Christians.
A lot of Christians.
Even Christians, because they've been told that.
Yep.
You know, that the old axiom, there's nothing so absurd but that if you repeat it often enough, people will believe it.
Yeah.
And that's really where we are. And so the court has said, no, we got all that wrong. We're getting away from activism. We're going back to history and tradition. And so history and tradition, that's why they left up the War Memorial Cross in Bladensburg. That's why they told Coach Kennedy it's okay for you to pray at football games. That's why it's okay to have nativity scenes back. That's history and tradition. That's what we've been doing since we've been a nation. We've been taught that was wrong, but that's where history helps put us back on the right track and the right kind of narratives.
For the Christians that don't believe that Bibles should be in school because of the separation of church and state, right? From the perspective of, hey, well, wouldn't the church or the state be pushing a certain church, right? The Bible.
See, what happens is people confuse morality with doctrine. And there are certain moral behaviors that you want in a culture. I mean, we just had this I speak at a lot of legislatures on various pieces of legislation. So when we were doing 10 Commandments bills, it's, okay, yeah, I agree. Do not kill comes out of the Bible. Is that doctrine or is that good behavior? Do you object to do not kill being on the walls of classrooms because it's a doctrine and the church the state is pushing a doctrine? Or is it that you just don't like anything that has religious underpinnings? Because the state already believes do not kill. That's why if you take the 10 Commandments, if I go to the U.S. Supreme Court in D.C., I can show you 53 depictions of the 10 Commandments inside the U.S. Supreme Court. 53 in the Supreme Court, that's more than any church has that I know of. And I can take you right around the corner next door to the Library of Congress, walk right in, and there's Moses holding the 10 Commandments. And then I'll take you across the street to the U.S. House of Representatives. You walk in the house, right on the side, there's the 10 Commandments. When you get inside, look back over your head, and there's Moses above you. And then I'll take you down to the National Archives, and as you look at the Constitution and Declaration, look down, there's the 10 Commandments. Wait a minute, this is all government stuff. That's not a church that's done that. That's why there are more than 300 cases where the courts have said the 10 Commandments are the basis of our civil laws. They even say, this is from them, they say even our modern laws on cattle rustling are based on the 10 Commandments. Our election fraud laws are based on the 10 Commandments. And they go through all these things that they say are based on the 10 Commandments. So is that teaching doctrine or is that just teaching good behavior? And is it possible that the moral behavior in the Bible is the best for a nation, regardless of what your doctrine is? I don't care what your doctrine is. I think it's a good deal that you don't steal, that you don't perjure yourself, that you don't kill. I don't care what your doctrine is. That's good behavior for a nation. And so that's what we're starting to get back to. And that's what we used to understand. Just because it's religious doesn't mean it's doctrinal. And just because it's religious doesn't mean a particular church is pushing it. To this day, all 50 states still today have on the books Good Samaritan laws. If you stop, I'm not a surgeon, but if I see you in a car wreck, I'm going to try to help you. And if I don't do the right thing, I'm trying to help you. And maybe I'm not a surgeon, I did the wrong thing. Good Samaritan laws protect those who are trying in good faith to help others. And they're called Good Samaritan laws to this day. That's directly out of Jesus' teaching in Matthew. Is that a doctrine or is that just good behavior? And so that's where people get confused. Just because it's religious doesn't mean it's a doctrine, doesn't mean it's church and state, doesn't mean a lot of this stuff is just common sense. It's good behavior. And that's what's made America so special. We had that moral underpinning that transcended Catholic and Protestant and atheist and everybody else. I mean, even Thomas Paine, who is not a God guy, still thought that you had good commands in the Bible. And that's why this kind of blows people's mind. When he was in the French Revolution trying to help them, he was actually elected in France. Thomas Paine, who's kind of called an American founding father. He's not, but he was there in the American founding. Thomas Paine actually did a lecture over in France to their educators, said, you guys are crazy. You should be teaching creation science. You should be teaching these kids that there is a creator, because if you don't teach there's a creator, there is no purpose to life. So here's the least religious one in that era, Thomas Paine, who's giving this big lecture to educators in France about don't be secular. Don't teach the Big Bang stuff. You have a creator. And that just blows people's mind today to see something like that. But even back then, the anti-religious were smart enough to know that so much behavior came from the Bible and from moral teachings, and that was good for everybody.
Wow. What and your involvement, and I'd love to cruise around a couple more things, but your involvement has been pretty significant, I think, in policy, right? So tell us about what you do and what you're. So obviously you love collecting.
Yeah, we do.
That's your passion. That's your passion. What do you? What's your involvement? What are you doing to continue to? Bring good behavior back into our country and to save our country. I know you're heavily involved politically. Yeah.
Well, one thing is education, because you behave on the basis of what you know, and your actions reflect what you know. So if you have bad knowledge, you're going to have bad results of that.
And that's what we've had with so many colleges, right? The typical college graduate believes our country needs to be reconstructed and disassembled. Yep.
They can tell you every bad thing that's happened, can't tell you the good things. And they can't compare us to other nations either. There is at this point in time, we do a lot of policy work. So we have there's 7,500 elected state legislators across the U.S. About 1,000 of them are in the network that we have, and we monitored any given year, there may be 152,000 pieces of state legislation introduced all 50 states. We'll monitor that, and we'll keep up with that and what goes on. So we work with policymakers on a very regular basis.
Is that through WallBuilders?
It is through WallBuilders.
Great. And what the website? So people, when I first checked out the website, it was incredible. So if you're curious about our nation's history, you have a ton of information on there where you can go see the actual documents and really dig in to see what was our past really about and how were we founded. What's the reality, not just what they teach in schools. So,
WallBuilders.com, and this is a division we call Pro-Family Legislative Network.
Okay.
So the network of legislators there. But when you change what people know, you change the policies that they want. And policies are a result of what you know or believe or think you believe. And if you can change that, if you can get back to more truth and what actually works, and going back to that is right now, we mentioned earlier that you've got 193 nations now, but in the history of the world there's been thousands, 1,500 years of history, and you cannot find a single instance where a socialistic nation has endured and prospered. Just doesn't exist. And yet right now, current stats, and because we are in public policy, we do lots of polling, we keep up with polling, but right now what you have is 75% of college students want the free market system gone and socialism to take its place. Now, what's the basis for that?
And that's statistic. That's based on
right
what
now.
you are
That's
saying.
right.
That's just not, okay.
71% of millennials want socialism over free market, and 75% of college students right now want socialism over free market.
Wow, that's a mess.
That's because you haven't heard the story. Because the story is socialism's never worked in 5,800 years to provide an enduring and a prosperous people. So that's where education becomes so important. If you don't change what people know, you don't change the policies. And so since we work in trying to educate people on what's out there, at the website, we put that stuff out there so people can see it, then it's easier to change policy. That's why we're seeing 22, 23 states introduce 10 Commandments laws. How come? Because the knowledge has now changed that it's okay to do these things. We've been told for 50 years we can't do this. Now we're finding out we can do this. So we're introduced. So when you change what people know, you change the way they behave and you change their expectations. And so that's
And you change the way they vote.
you change the way they vote. Yeah, because once you change expectations, you'll change policy. And voting is what makes policy. Policy is personnel. It is not parties, it is personnel. Now, parties are very involved. I've been involved in politics a good part of my life. Elected 5 times here in Texas. So partisan office. So I've been involved in that, and I know how that works, but I also know that you can't lead people where they don't want to go or what they don't know. You can't lead them to what they don't know. So you have to change what they know, and then you can change the candidates, and then you can change the policies, and that's a slow process, but it's part of it.
Yeah, we're seeing a shift, and so I appreciate all that you do. It's necessary. There's not a lot of great storytellers that actually can have the evidence and the stories to be able to back that kind of everything we talked about on the podcast today. Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of biographical history. You know, founding fathers are some of my favorite guys.
Yeah.
Because they do so many cool things.
I love it.
You know, John Hart was one of those guys. He's an old man, signed the Declaration, old man, but when the British came after him, he knew they'd kill him. And so family and others urged him to run, and he was at the bedside of his wife, who was very sick. And the friends got him out, and they hit him, and his wife ends up dying. All of his kids disappear. He didn't see them again. He lived the next 1 year and never spent 2 nights in a row in the same place. He even stayed in a doghouse where the British were hunting him one time, in with the dog, and sleep in trees and whatever. And he's an old man and going through all this kind of stuff. And who's ever heard of John Hart? You know, even the people who live in New Jersey don't even know John Hart. And you start going through these guys, you go, man, that's a lot of courage. That's a lot of conviction, that his family. And the more you know, the more interesting it becomes. And the more you accept what these guys had to say on the positive side, you say, hey, he didn't know what he was talking about. You know, he went through a lot of stuff. And there's just so many remarkable stories, these guys. You know, even the wives who were made prisoners of war and tortured by the British, we don't even know about the wives of the signers anymore. You know, they're an innocuous group.
Yeah, they're never...
The founding fathers. No, they're people. They're people who went through just what we did.
What are a couple of the other interesting...
interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Over here, this is fun stuff here. The first major war we get into after the American Revolution is against, it's 32 years of fighting Muslim terrorists. So the Barbary Powers War.
Yep.
What happened is in the Constitution forbids America from having a permanent military. Everybody thinks we got a permanent one. It's not. The NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, every 2 years we bring the military back into existence every 2 years. Constitution does not allow the military to last more than 2 years.
I don't think a lot of people know that.
They don't know that.
Yep.
And it goes back to founding fathers. They hated what were called standing armies, because standing armies always backed the king, Napoleon or whoever, and you'd use the army to conquer the people, and we didn't want that. That's why we were all militias and states and communities, and everybody had a gun, and everybody went and defended everything. So what happens is we didn't want a military until 1795. In 1795, in Washington's last year, he says, I've had it up to here. Because wherever American ships were going, Muslims were attacking them to kill and enslave them. There's about 1.3 million taken by Muslims across that period of time.
Wow.
White slaves were taken, and people think it's just black and white slavery. No. I mean, just black slavery, it's black and white. And so we have all and what the Muslims will do is say, well, we'll let you have these guys back if you'll pay us so much. And so what happens is we start paying massive amounts of Muslims, and that funds their jihads. And so we're actually paying for them to attack. And so what happens is right here, I'll show you this document from 1789. Now the reason this is fun, this is the front page of the newspaper, 1789. You see that right there? That little area there? That is the entire first federal budget. That's everything in the federal budget.
In the newspaper?
This year it was 2,500 pages in the federal budget. So
wow.
So at that time with George Washington, our number one expense was paying Muslim terrorists. 15% of the federal budget went to Muslim terrorists. 15%. And Washington
that's on there?
It shows up down in a big area. So Washington says, his line is, would to God I had a navy able to crush these enemies of mankind into non-existence. And so for the first time, Congress appropriates money to build a navy.
Okay.
So they build the navy under John Adams, but John Adams does not use it to go to war against the Muslims, because he said, look, I've been negotiating with these guys for 20 years, back to 1784. As soon as we get done with the American Revolution, we start having to negotiate with Muslims who are attacking us. He says, these guys have a long-term mindset. They think in decades, they don't think in years. He said, the American people don't understand that if we go to war against the Muslims, it's going to last for years and years and years. And so he said, I'd rather pay them than fight them. So at the end of John Adams' term, 20% of the federal budget was being spent to pay Muslims. And Jefferson comes in and says, ain't no way. And so he took that new navy, he loaded it up, he sent it to Tripoli, which this is the map. There were 5 Muslim nations attacking us at that point in time. This is a map, and this up here, Mediterranean Sea. This is Spain and Portugal, and there's the Straits of Gibraltar. But you can see across here, you got Morocco, and you got Algiers, and you got Tunis, and this is the nation Tripoli, which would be Libya, and this is Barca, Egypt. So these nations across North Africa are attacking us, and so we go right into Tripoli. And this is where the Marine comes from. The halls of Montezuma, the shores of Tripoli. That's when we went for the first time with the Navy and went and whacked these guys and said, you're not going to keep taking our people, because they had enslaved so many of our people. And so what happens with it, when we're fighting over there, we've really never fought against the Muslims before. We fought Western powers, France or England, whatever. And this is part of what was going on. This is a Muslim sword from that period of time. They call that a quick sword. It is super sharp, even now, several hundred years later. But they're really good for beheading. And so as a result, we come out with this. We come out with leather collars. This is where you get the term leathernecks. So the Marines, this is where the Marines got the leathernecks, was fighting Muslim terrorists in the War on Terror back under Thomas Jefferson. So from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, that's our first major war, and nobody ever thinks about that being a war. We're not even aware of that. But 32 years we had that conflict going. And by the way, this is this musket right here. This was a British-American musket, and they got captured by Muslims, and they kind of bedazzled it. So this is, the silver plating all over it. But this is one that would have been used in that time period, that time frame, in fighting Muslims. This is one that they, again, took off of American or British, one or the other, because it is a British musket, and we were using British muskets as well. But that's now been for that war. So some documents from that, and that's a fun period of time that doesn't get much coverage, and it's a lot of fun to cover. Yeah, this is an interesting piece. If you can see in close on that, can you tell what that is?
Hair.
Yeah, it's George Washington's hair.
Okay.
When he died,
Wow.
Martha cut that off and gave that to Alexander Hamilton, and it came down from Alexander Hamilton's kids. So that's George Washington's lock of hair from the point of his death. So that's fun too. This is fun. This is, if you look up how George Washington died, they'll give you the name of the disease, but he really died with that stuff. This is the aspirin for that day. So if you see here, these are all razor blades. And what happened is if you had a fever, the doctors back then said fever is an overexcitement of the blood. So if you have a fever, your blood's too excited, we need to take some blood out of you and the fever will go down. So what happened with Washington, he came in, had a high fever, and he said, I need to get rid of some blood. So he took about 32 ounces out, thereabouts. Then the doctors got there and they said that wasn't enough. So essentially they took about 40% of his blood trying to get his fever to come down. So that's how George Washington died, was medical treatment as opposed to something else. But about 40% of his blood was drawn from him. So I appreciate our medicine today, even though we'll probably still got a lot way to go and a lot of things to learn. That's not what it was back then, for sure. So old Bibles, there's a painting back there you find that inside the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. This is the picture of the pilgrims coming to the New World. So they're gathered around here. This is their pastor, John Robinson. This is a Bible they gather around. If you see how big that book is there, that is called the world's first pocket Bible. And that's a big book. Well, this is what you're looking at, this book right here. This is that Geneva Bible. Now, the Geneva Bible, what makes this interesting, this is the first Bible ever printed in the English language. This is from 1590. It has the birth and death dates of various people born in 1631, 1633, 1634, 16. So this is the family history. And what makes this Bible interesting, it's the first Bible printed in the English language. So it was printed in Geneva, and it's called a Geneva Bible because of that. But what's interesting is we've now gone through the Reformation, which is people said, hey, wait a minute, the Bible says this. I know the kings have been telling us this, but this is what the Bible says. And so the Reformation was a back to the Bible movement. And so as a result, that's where you start seeing the rise of elected governments. That's where you start seeing the end of state-established churches, etc. And these commentaries out here, all these little lines out there, these are all commentaries from major reformers in what's called the Reformation. So these guys go through and say, guys, here's what we've been doing, but look what the Bible says here, and we've been doing it wrong. And so this challenges the culture and the narrative. And so page after page after page, you get these commentaries. Well, it's interesting. This is where the Pilgrims got that anti-slavery stuff, the death penalty for slave trade. This is where, if you go to the Supreme Court, I've been in 13 cases, involved in 13 cases of the U.S. Supreme Court, and Justice Stephen Breyer, I think, is one of the most secular justices we've ever had in the court. And even a decision he did, he said, well, of course we all know the due process clauses come out of the Bible. Do we? And so I went and looked at the citation he had in the case, and it went back to federal practice and procedure. And in federal practice and procedure, it talked about how that the right to confront you, now the due process rights is the 4th or the 8th Amendment of the Constitution. So the right to confront your accuser, etc. Right to confront your accuser came out of John 8:10 in here. And then you start finding, wait a minute, is that all? No. The right to compel witnesses in your behalf is Proverbs 18:17. And there are so many other, the right to speak in your own defense, Acts 22:1. So many of the due process rights that we have came out of the Bible. The economic system, the Pilgrims used 1 Timothy 5:8, 2 Thessalonians 3:10, Matthew 20, Luke 19, Matthew 25 to build what we call the free market system. First free market system, 1,000 years, Pilgrims. And they said when they went away from socialism, went to the free market, within 2 years their productivity increased 7-fold. And that's the Pilgrims. And so this is where you find the first education laws. From here, the laws aren't here, but the basis of the local laws are. So the Pilgrims, they use this book, which is what you see them gather around over there, to completely reshape the culture.
Wow.
And so the kings didn't like that, and the result is this. This is the King James Bible. It came out in 1611. This is the 1612 version. 1611 is really big. But when you get on the inside, notice it has no commentaries. You guys are used to doing it the way we do it. Just you don't need commentaries. And so it's essentially the same words, but it doesn't have the commentaries on it. And so that's the difference between the King James and Geneva. But this is what the Pilgrims used to really reshape the world and reshape the country. And knowledge of that Bible is really, really important. So looking at the history of political parties, we've got two major parties now. The Democrats get started in about 1837, Andrew Jackson. The Republicans started in May of 1854. And it's because the Democrats pushed through three laws that just absolutely they thought were abominable. You had the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which said we're going to allow slavery in places that never had it before, the Kansas Territory. You had the fugitive slave law that says no slave can be free anywhere in the United States. If they escape anywhere, we can go get them, bring them back with the power of the federal government to do that. So you cannot escape and be in a free state. And if you go to a free state like Massachusetts, you still have to come back into slavery. And so all these laws went through, and at that point in time,
and that was from the Democrats.
From the Democrats. They were all Democrat laws. And a bunch of third-party guys got together, the Whigs, the Free Soilers, the Emancipationists, the others. They said, why don't we go back to the principles of the Republic? So they called it the Republican Party. Let's go back to what the Founding Fathers wanted. And so what happens is you start seeing things come like this is the platform of 1864 where it compares the Republicans and the Democrats. So you have side by side, this is Lincoln's second election. He's the first Republican elected as president. So the party gets started in 1854. In 1860, when he ran, we have the 1860 platform, but there's only like 9 planks in it. And 7 of the 9 are civil rights. And that's what Lincoln ran on. If we're going to end slavery, we're going to make sure everybody's free. Then this is his re-election platform and the same kind of thing here. So just, I mean, it was just real clear, race and equality, and everybody's going to be the same. So if you take the Dred Scott decision, this is a decision in the Supreme Court that said, no blacks have any rights which a white man is bound to respect. So this is huge. There's a repeal of all, and it actually was a repeal of civil rights laws. And so what happens with that, this is in Washington, which is where the Supreme Court is. But if you look at these, there's a whole bunch of them that say New York. Now, why would they say New York, not Washington? Because that was the headquarters of the National Democratic Party at the time. And so what happened was the Democrats printed Dred Scott decision, gave it out with their 1860 platform when they ran against Lincoln, said, look, the Supreme Court has said we're right on the race issue. There's no rights that a white man is bound to respect from a black person. So it was a very racially divided campaign, literally by the documents. So Lincoln won that, come up to 1864, it's still got the same issues, still race. 1865, we passed the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery. 100% of Republicans vote to abolish slavery. Only 23% of Northern Democrats vote. All the Southern Democrats have already seceded. They've gone with the South. You have only the Northern Democrats, and only 23% of Northern Democrats vote to abolish slavery. You come to the 14th Amendment, which gives equal rights to blacks and whites. Democrats didn't support that, and now the Civil War's over. This is 1868. You come to 1870, voting rights for blacks. Not a single Democrat voted for the 15th Amendment, voting rights for blacks. It's a very clear issue. And so as you look at the first 23 civil rights laws passed between 1861 and 1876, they're partisan all the way through. Republicans support them, Democrats oppose them. So when you come to this is actually a campaign piece. And what happened when the Republican Party was in power in Alabama. Now, if you can see that picture, there's a whole lot of black faces in there. And by the way, let me pull one here. So if you look at this, there's a whole lot of black folks. This is what happened when the Republican Party's in power in Alabama. So this is Reconstruction, blacks and whites. And by the way, this is from South Carolina. Now, this is a Ku Klux Klan card. This is what they gave out so they would know who they're supposed to lynch. And on the back, it tells you the names of these 63 individuals. And so what you have here, and by the way, let's go back to the founding of the Klan in 1865. We have in the congressional hearings they did in 1875 about the Klan says we were founded to take back power from the Republican Party. I thought it was all about race. It was about the Republican Party. And so this is a Klan card that came out in 1868, and it has 63 Republicans. These are all the Republicans of South Carolina legislature. There's 50 black Republicans, 13 white Republicans. They're all on the hit list for the cards. And if you look at the numbers, between 1882 and about 1962, when it goes to lynchings, there's about 4,800 Klan lynchings in that time, all lynchings, Klan lynchings. And 3,500 are of blacks and 1,300 are of whites. 1 out of every 4 lynchings was of a white guy. Why was that? Because we're after Republicans. We're not after just blacks. Any black, if you find a black, they're going to be a Republican. But you can't lynch any white because some of them are Democrats. So literally, this is what was going on. So when you read this here, it says, the above is a photograph of the Alabama legislature of 1872 when the Republican Party was in power in Alabama. The Negroes in the above picture were members of the legislature. Then it says down here, if you are willing to risk a Republican and a Negro legislature in Alabama, like the legislature of 1872, vote for Herbert Hoover, the Republican president. If you believe in white supremacy, vote the straight Democrat ticket on November the 6th. This is put up by the Democrat Party. The Democrats, this is their piece. This is not Republicans making fun of Democrats, calling them racist. This is the Democrat piece. And they say, if you believe in white supremacy. So that's another part that gets folded today. Republicans are all a bunch of racists. They've always been that way. No, that means you know nothing about history. Now, if you want to argue that Republicans are racist today, let's have that argument, but don't make it on the basis of history and how things were founded, because they just wasn't part of it. So that's why when you look at those, we talked earlier about the 1,000 black elected officials, none of them were Democrats. By 1876, we don't know of a single Democrat elected official that was elected by 1876, although there were 1,000 blacks elected. Some of them in the founding era certainly weren't Republican or Democrat, but the overwhelming majority, over 900, were Republicans that elected in that period of time. And that's just a part of history nobody gets.
Wow.
So with World War II, when everything's going on, one of the big problems we get into is bad weather in Europe. And Patton, man, from the time that Patton arrives in North Africa, he just rolls, and he's just an awesome commander as far as winning battles goes. And when he is rolling into Germany, he gets into bad weather. And at that point in time, our American Sherman tanks weren't very good against the German tanks. We got into World War II, we were still using World War I tanks. We weren't ready for war. We didn't want to go to war. We believed that if we weren't a threat to anybody, nobody would come after us, and that proved to be wrong. So when the war starts, it was 11 months from the time we got attacked to the time that we did anything, because it took 11 months to get enough people in the military to train them, to build enough tanks, build enough planes. We were still flying biplanes from World War I when World War II started. So we weren't in good shape at all. 11 months, we just kind of are waiting for stuff to get done. So when Patton goes over and lands in North Africa, and now we start going across North Africa, his tanks, Sherman tanks, aren't that great. The Tigers and Panthers just blow them out. The way we handled their tanks was our aircraft. P-51 Mustangs, P-40s, P-47s, others. We could blow their tanks up, and then our tanks were good against machine guns and against bazookas and other stuff, but we needed planes in the air. And so Patton is just rolling, but he gets into a period of about 3 months where he can't get a plane off the ground hardly. It's just bad weather, just bad weather. And he keeps saying, what's the forecast? Well, it's always like this in Europe this time of year. Over in Germany and France, it's bad weather. And he just keeps going and going and going. And he finally calls in the chaplain, James O'Neill, and says, Chaplain, he said, do you have a prayer for this weather? And Chaplain said, I'll check the prayer books, get back to you. Got back, said, don't have a prayer for this, I'll write you one. And he said that Patton then turned his back on him, went to the window, looked out the window, all the rain. And he said, he said, Chaplain, he said, do our men pray? He said, yes, sir, that's why we have chaplain. He said, I didn't ask if the chaplains pray. I want to know if the men are praying. He said, well, there's no atheists in Foxville. Sure. No, I want every man in this army praying. And so Chaplain O'Neill wrote out a prayer for weather, that God would change the weather. Patton said, I want that distributed to all 250,000 of my men. That happened as he was going into the Battle of the Bulge. And what happened is Patton was going into the Battle of the Bulge, which is turning point battle in World War II. If the Germans had won that, the war would have been going a long time more. So Patton had a habit as he was going across Europe, taking all these places. He would stop at churches, and churches are all abandoned. People know that armies are coming through, they're away from that. And he would go into churches, and they're high, what are called high church. So they have a lot of statues, a lot of stained glass, a lot of visual stuff, high ceilings, high church tradition. A lot of American churches are low churches, just kind of casual stuff. And so he would walk in, and his officers would go with him, and he would take his helmet off and stand in front of the statue of Jesus and give Jesus a briefing. He'd say, "Sir, here's what we did last week. I was able to take this." And he would go through telling Jesus what he had done. He said, "Now here's where I'm going to be next week. I need your help when I get here." And he would just talk to him it's like he was briefing Eisenhower. And they said that when he got to the Battle of the Bulge, he stopped at Luxembourg, which is his headquarters. He went into the church, and his staff went with him, and they said that the prayer, the report he gave Jesus was so unusual, they wrote it down. And afterwards they said, "Is this what you said?" He said, "Yes." And he got really ticked. And he told Jesus, "I'm not sure whose side you're on." He said, "I've had this weather for 3 months, and if you'd give me good weather, I could get rid of the Germans and end this war and stop the killing. But you haven't given me good weather. I keep asking the chaplains to give good weather, and they're not." And he just goes off on Jesus, essentially. And so they wrote it down. Well, the next day when he came out, he passed out this prayer card. This is the prayer card that they made. It's signed by Patton on the back, because this is what happened in Christmas. So they gave out this prayer card on the 22nd of December, 22nd, 23rd of December of 1945. So it's Merry Christmas from your General Patton. On the other side is the prayer. And this is what Chaplain O'Neill wrote out. The 250,000 guys started praying. It says, "Almighty God, our most merciful Father, we humbly beseech Thee of Thy great goodness to restrain these moderate rains," and on through it goes. So they started praying that on the 22nd. On the 24th, and he told Jesus in the church, he said, "If you'll give me 4 days of good weather," he said, "I will send you more Germans than your bookkeepers in heaven can keep up with. Just give me 4 days." So on the 23rd, I started praying 22nd, 23rd. On the 24th, the weather reports, and it's interesting, 6 days in a row of completely clear skies, and the weather reports, we have the after-action reports of the Third Army. It says miraculous, another miracle again today. The weather report called for bad weather, and they kept having clear skies. And so he got planes in the air, he took care of the tanks, they win the Battle of the Bulge, that ends World War II, it stops the killing. But this prayer right here, Patton's prayer, is considered to be a turning point in that war with the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow, wow.
And then it goes back in. Tell them how it went back.
Oh yeah. As they were leaving Luxembourg, Patton stopped back at the church again, went for Jesus and apologized. Said, "You had this after all. You had it planned a lot better than I did. Thanks for your help." And so it was an apology of Patton. Patton didn't apologize to anybody, but he did to Jesus.
So from all this, as we close out from your many years of experience and collecting and your heart for Christ, and all the work that you've done in politics, like you have a wealth of knowledge, more than really anybody that I've honestly ever met. Your level of knowledge and your intelligence. What would you say is one or two key lessons that you've learned that you'd want to transfer over to the people watching and listening to this?
The Bible says, "Prove all things and hold fast that which is true." And I don't care how close your friend is, you need to check it out, see if it's right. The things you get told often are not right, and it's not because people are malicious, they're just repeating what they've heard. And so you have to know truth for yourself. You have to go find truth, you have to determine truth. Truth is the only thing that will sustain and last forever. So Jesus says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life." All of us have been misinformed on a number of things, some maliciously, some not maliciously. You have to go find the truth, search the truth, seek out the truth, and then when you do, you have to conform your life to it. You may find truth challenges you to do some things you didn't want to do. And it's not what I believe, it's not what I was taught, it's not what school taught me. Great, what are you going to do now? You've seen the truth. And so you have to have the courage to do something. So seek truth is the first thing. Independently verify truth, not by your opinions. Go to primary source stuff. Then have the courage to conform to what that truth is. And then you have to get involved. I remember the story in the Old Testament where those 4 lepers sat there and said, "Why sit we here till we die? We can't just keep sitting here." And they're the ones who turned the battle. They went and found the enemy was gone. And so people, "I'm just one person. What can I do? There's 340 million. That's right. but one person can do something. And, you know, in all these battles and things we see, people made a difference. And so maybe you don't make a vast difference. Maybe you just change one person. But maybe that one person is the person that changes everything else. And I point to Abraham Lincoln. Nobody knows who the Reverend James Smith is, but they should, because he's the guy who made Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was a great atheist. He had memorized the Bible, could out-debate every pastor that was out there. A couple of crises happened in his life. He lost some kids. He read the writings of this guy nobody knows, this James Smith, and he gave all these great arguments against atheism, and Lincoln says, wow, I've never heard that before. And a few years later, he went and got James Smith, said, I need somebody to help me get back to God. I think you're right. And so James Smith brought him back to God and was his pastor when Lincoln is in office. When Lincoln actually becomes a Christian, Lincoln says this after he was president that he became a Christian, and it all goes to one guy. And so we look at what Lincoln did, all the civil rights stuff he did, one guy. So nobody knows who Smith is, but Lincoln wouldn't be who he was without Smith. So find somebody, mentor somebody, take them and kind of take them under your wing and help them. Just commit yourself to a relationship with somebody that you can help instruct them in some way. And so that's the key. Jesus said, make disciples of all people. Go find somebody you can disciple. Find somebody you can lead in the right direction, that you can share truth with. You don't have to have a huge following. Just go find one person. That may make all the difference.
David, it has been a blessing. Thank you so much for your time. Such an incredible, not only collection, but your stories, your wisdom. Hopefully that the guys and women that are listening to this will have a different perspective of our nation's history, but then also go do something about it.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks again.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
So what do we got over here?
Well, there's a lot of Bibles here. Here's a Bible from World War II, and it's got a steel plate on the outside, so if a bullet hit it, got that in the breastplate. We've actually had two guys in here that their lives were saved by bullets hitting that World War II.
Shield of faith.
Shield of faith. This is called the world's smallest Bible. So it's kind of cool, and then you open it up and you go, oh my goodness, how do you type, sit, or print that, either one, and be able to read it? These are kids' Bibles. They call them thumb Bibles, early 1800s, late 1700s. So these are little Bible stories for kids so they can have their own book. This is a Bible from 1400s.
Check this out. This is pretty cool.
This is a Coptic Bible. So Christians in Egypt, this is their language and their Bible, and the artwork is pretty amazing. Although, don't rub your finger across the green. That's arsenic. That's how they colored it. They didn't know what it was at that point in time. So that's arsenic down there. So fun stuff there. These are other Bibles. This is a fun Bible here. Now, see how big this is? Try carrying that to church with you someday. Except this Bible is 8 volumes. So it goes from here to here. And you open it up, and on the inside, as it turns out, it's raised letter. This is for the blind. And so it's before Braille, and they had this, and then they went to Braille, and then still did this afterwards. But you run, I've tried this. I cannot distinguish a single letter, and it just amazes me what the blind can do with this. But this is a Bible for the blind. But it's 8 volumes to have the whole Bible.
Wow.
Can you distinguish any letter on that?
Absolutely not. No.
It's just, and I just watch them go over and read it. It's just awesome. So, some more fun Bibles. So this is really the first picture you have of the U.S. Capitol. This is the year after it's done. But look at the Washington Monument, because it still wasn't done. It was right here. That was what it was drawn to look like, and then when they finished it out in '88, they never did that stuff there on it. So that's the old Smithsonian. John Quincy Adams set up the original Smithsonian. But if you look here, the Capitol here, and you see this coming down here, the Potomac, that was a canal that went up to the Capitol. You could take a boat right to the steps of the Capitol. White House is over the side right here. So in 1902, they moved the whole river a half mile this way. So now you have the Lincoln Monument here and the Jefferson Memorial here. But all of this, Washington actually helped build that canal. And that was how you got the Capitol right up Canal Street, which is now Constitution Avenue, and that's Independence over there. So D.C., real different. But Jefferson is the guy in charge of laying that out when he's Secretary of State. And then here's Here's when they finished the Washington Monument. So, that's what it was designed to look like, and they ran out of money, and so that's what they ended up having it look like.